servants and those people who UNISON represent in this country. And you know, our members have told us that they believe it is in their interest personally, and it is also within the interest of the people that they work for to stay in the European Union. There's been some brief touching this evening already on what would be the immediate economic impact of a leave vote if we were to turn our backs on Thursday. Whether it is a 0.5 recession or whether it is a recession that's much deeper going into the final 6%, ultimately that doesn't matter, because the first line of people who will be affected by any impact on our economy will be public servants. Most of the people in this room, I presume, are UNISON members or have at some point had contact with UNISON members. You will know from the stories that you will have heard from your colleagues, your friends, your family, that the public sector has bore the brunt of the last recession unfairly, given that it wasn't caused by the public sector. And do we really believe that if we turn our backs on Europe on Thursday, that the current government, no offence to my friend Jeremy, the current government won't seek to have a similar round of economic contraction to balance any problems that come forward? And it will be the public sector that faces that challenge, and it will be the people that can ill afford to lose the public sector that will be suffering the most. We've touched briefly also on the workers' rights issue, and obviously as a trade union, workers' rights are something that are fundamental to the work that we do. There are workers' rights that Europe protect. They may not be as generous as we have in the country at the moment, but that is not to say that we shouldn't be part of the union to protect them. Maternity and paternity leave, paid leave, TUPE arrangements if you're being transferred around, and heaven knows in the public sector at the moment people are picked up and dumped into all sorts of organisations. If it wasn't for those TUPE regulations, then you would end up with constant cutting of terms and conditions. A very important part, particularly for UNISON as a trade union that represents mainly low-paid women and part-time workers, is the equal treatment of part-time workers regulation that came in from Europe, that means that if you are a part-time worker, you cannot be treated any less favourably than your full-time equivalent. Those are the sorts of rights that we're interested in protecting, and those are the sorts of rights that we fear would be undermined substantially if we were to turn our back on Europe. The picture that's been painted by my colleagues to my left in many ways are quite clear about the threats that we would have as a result of coming out of Europe, because there would be an increase in this free market experimentation. But again, the people that would suffer that are the people that can least ill afford that. And under the current government, I may be wrong, and maybe the people in this room will disagree with me, but I can't foresee a government led by Boris Johnson or Michael Gove or any of the current Conservative front bench campaigning for Brexit saying, I tell you what, now we're out of Europe, let's go further on improving workers' rights. Let's go further in making sure that our companies and our big businesses are looking after the employers. Let's go further to make sure that wages go up above inflation, that we're getting better pay deals. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe there are, maybe that is exactly what Chris Grayling is sitting writing at this very moment, a way of increasing workers' rights, but I don't believe that. And while Europe may not be an unending protection to those rights, it does at least create a minimum standard that we can be certain that any future government cannot take us below.
Great, I'm going to call time at that point in time, so you're about to start another sentence, and then I've stopped you after 2 seconds. So, thank you all, and it really is now over to you as audience members. We want to hear from you and take your questions. And who would like to be first to put a question to the panel, please? Yes, please, sir. What's your name? And Steve's got the mic in case we need that, so thank you. Yeah.
Am I on?
Yeah. Yes, you're live.
Name's Les Cooper, actually come from Canada. I only heard about this. I'm not a member of UNISON, but it was by default. Just a couple of points before I ask. I've got 2 questions, but I'm just going to put one for now. Yeah. Before I do that, if I can say that for me, the campaign so far has been left a lot to be desired. I think, I forget the words Mr. Manning said, but yeah, it's a bit dirty as far as I'm concerned. And there are times when I thought we might all as well go to the nearest cemetery and lie down and wait to be covered over. Because there's been that much scaremongering and fear factoring and talked about lies and fabrications and goodness knows what. But what I really would like to have seen during this debate is for more to be said about what Europe really, what, I beg your pardon, what the EU really is. Because I've heard little about, to balance the debates about the common agricultural policy, the common fisheries policy, the fact that the accounts don't get audit, pass audit, movement of Parliament from Brussels to Strasbourg. Why does that happen, at what cost? And then there are other things like the cost of trade as well. We talk about jobs that might be lost, but I don't hear about the total cost of trade, knowing that we actually buy more from the EU than they sell to us. That's my understanding. Anyway, to the question, control of our affairs. What we've actually lost to Brussels, what have we actually lost to Brussels that ordinary people can relate to? That's the first part of the question. Our Prime Minister says we won't give away any more major control without a referendum. Now, what is left then that might be given away? So, what are we giving away and what are we likely to give away?
Yep.
And if I just add one personal note on that,
Yep.
I don't think there will be anything else of major consequence of our affairs that will be given away directly. Because I believe that we've got unelected bureaucrats in the EU, and to me they are political stonemasons and they're chipping away at the targets. Thank you.
Okay, right, a big significant question there. Who would like to begin from the Remain side on that one? Jeremy, away you go.
Thanks very much. It's a question that comes up time and again. If I can just say that I agree with you about the tone of the debate, it has not been good. However, I and others have taken part in many debates locally and on national radio that have had a very different tenor to it, to the ones that you have seen. So there has been debate going on, but it is a great shame that a lot of the national debate has been so bad. In terms of what is done, I tried to, in my remarks, to point out all the huge areas where we make the decisions here in the UK, in Westminster, or in the devolved parliaments, or indeed at a council level, such as over our health service, over defence, over education, over welfare, over pensions, and so on. The country, as a country, we spend, the government spends about £760 billion a year, of which a very small part is spent actually through, if you like, the European Union, a net figure of under £10 billion, which is just over 1%. And then you can say that there is certain other expenditure that we have that is to some extent affected by it, whether it's on the environment or on agriculture, although some of that is coming through the Common Agricultural Policy, which you referred to. So the amount of money that, if you like, is controlled of our budget, and if you think that the control of a budget is the government's the main way in which a government runs a country, then a very, very small part of that actually is controlled through the European Union. In terms of laws, that's a different area. Where we see the most activity through the European Union is on areas where we believe that it's generally, and we will have some differences on that, but in our common interest to work together. So on the environment, we don't have a British environment. We work together with our European partners on things like quality of water, quality of air, and so on. It's vital that we tackle these things together. On business regulation, it's vital that we don't end up with a race to the bottom in terms of rights, workers' rights, or health and safety, so that you end up with goods being produced in one country with standards which are absolutely different from standards in another country. So because business regulation tends to have a lot to it, there are an awful lot of regulations. Now, if we come out of the European Union, the idea that those regulations would somehow disappear, that we wouldn't want any regulation, I think is not true at all. We would want that regulation. Health and safety is an incredibly important part of that, of our protection as citizens and at work. So most of what is coming comes with the agreement, not just of commissioners, but with our own government of all parties, because we want to see those come in. Now, there are some contentious issues. We've had the contentious issues around things like the European arrest warrant, and areas concerned with law and justice. And that's where I think we found quite a lot of kickback, because people are saying, hang on, that's a bit more difficult, that area, because we have a different system of laws from other countries in the European Union. And there have been challenges over that. I personally think the European arrest warrant is generally a good thing, but there are other areas where I know that colleagues in the House of Commons are a bit concerned. And I would be certainly concerned if we went further in those areas than we have done already. So I hope that gives an idea that on the money side, the UK government controls a vast majority, 98–99% of our budget. On the legal side, it's mainly around environment and business and workers' rights, but there are areas which are getting a bit more contentious.
Thank you very much indeed, Jeremy. I'm going to come over here. Dave, Graham, who would like to go
Both
first?
a bit. You can cut us off.
Yeah, of course you can.
Well, I spent 25 years as the representative of the TGWU in the European Union. I never actually favoured it, never actually believed Jacques Delors when he told the TUC everything was going to be wonderful. You know, I tried to do my job. I tried to make it work. You can't. It's stacked against working people. I'm not going to talk about bent cucumbers, but I can tell you whatever you like about the fisheries policy. I actually was involved in that. The British fishing is dead. TNG used to organise it. I'll tell you why that's the case. The 7 working time directives. Actually, here's a case where it's the evil minister in Britain that can actually make an effect. We actually had some progress on the working time directives for transport workers, not general. But it was Peter Mandelson, as the business secretary, who took the opportunity to erect the most rigid form of structure on working time directives out of any of the members of the European Union. So these directives do have varying possibilities. As the TGWU had experience in defeating European deregulation of taxes, ports, baggage handling, the European Union has been obsessed with creating the free market. That's what it does. It's creating a cheap labour market for businesses to compete against. The vast majority of workers' rights predate the European Union. And as the Vice President of the International Transport Workers Federation, a global federation, I spend a lot of time dealing with the problems in the Baltic Sea arising from the disputes whereby Lithuanian and Estonian seafarers were being put on ships coming from Finland and Sweden and Denmark, undercutting, undermining, no health and safety, no trade union rights, which resulted in the European Court of Justice's decisions on the Viking and the Laval cases and many others. The Services Director, UNISON, you should be interested in this. The Services Directive has got a little bit put on the back burner. But once the European Union's got over these little local difficulties, they will be pressing hard to get teaching and medical services privatised and run by American companies. This isn't another Europe. It's only going to be possible in a struggle that would make the battle for Stalingrad seem tame, where every room was fought over and 1 million men died. The same kind of effort over dozens of treaties, winning support in every single member state across Europe, all of which are opposed to workers' rights, are struggling to make workers' rights worse. Tell me one thing that has been improved since 1992 in terms of workers' rights from the European Union.
Well, I will pause at that point. Yes, please.
Workers' rights.
And then, so quickly on that, and then I'm going to come back over to this side. What has been improved?
The Part-Time Workers Directive. The Part-Time Workers Directive that came from Europe, that was implemented in this country as a direct result of the directive, means that if you are a part-time worker in this country, you cannot be treated any less favourably than your full-time counterpart.
Swedish derogation.
Can I just come in there, because I'm...
Quickly, and then I promise I'll go back to this side. Please,
come
Mike.
back, but he's had a little while. I want to say I'm very much interested in the attitude of French workers in France to the present situation and their relationships with that socialist President Hollande. And I applaud the way that they are taking, in a sense, direct action, and they are defending their workers' rights. And I think that is fundamentally important. And I will then go on to say that if we leave Europe, then we stand alone and our workers' rights are absolutely at risk. And I'll also go on to say that rather than leaving Brexit, we must get, leaving Europe, we must get much more involved, because the greatest catastrophe facing us is climate change. And that is ongoing and will be a desperate situation in 20 to 30 years, which will threaten livelihoods, threaten mass immigration, unless we all combined get together to deal with it in Europe and throughout the world. And the other thing is, we're going to have another crash of capitalism, bound to happen. We need to be unified to cope with it. So whilst I identify with a lot of what my colleagues, comrades over there might be saying, it depends fundamentally on the fact that we belong to Europe to face the kind of issues and face down the kind of issues which they are raising.
Many thanks, Mike.
To
Dave.
control global warming and climate change, we need to stop the poison of carbon dioxide and other similar gases going in the atmosphere. The two industries which produce the most are energy and transport. They're the two industries with which directives from the EU are liberalising, marketising and driving further away from the public ownership which is necessary in order to be able to plan those things. Secondly, 1 million French workers took strike action and marched through Paris last Tuesday because the EU wasn't protecting their workers' rights, and they had to take direct action in order to do so. And that's why the news, I understand, last night only caught the end of it, but the latest poll that came out in France last night was 71% hostility to the EU and its institutions in that country. The point I wanted to answer was the question which Les raised, which was what have we lost to Brussels in terms of laws and so that ordinary people can relate to. Well, the way in which laws are made in the European Union is that the unelected Commission proposes the laws, and the final decision is in the hands of the heads of government, 28 heads of government. The European Parliament is allowed to comment on the laws and is allowed to either wholly reject or wholly accept, but not to amend, has no process in the framing of those laws. So it tends to be that the countries start 2 or 3 years earlier than they get through to that process to make the decisions between the heads of government, then they go through the dance of taking it through the European structures. So, for example, we've had 3 postal services directives which have led to the privatisation of Royal Mail and is following a similar path in other parts of Europe. We've just had the 4th rail transport directive, which has been passed by the Council of Ministers, and that's forcing cross-border rail systems in Germany and elsewhere to be put out to competition. And the one last example I'll give of how we're losing the ability to have a say over laws, and I haven't got time to explain this properly unless you ask me a question in detail about it, which is TTIP, this transatlantic partnership with America. There's one called CETA, which is the Canadian one with the EU, which is currently well ahead of the process. It started in 2009. And in the last week, Italy has invoked its veto to prevent the 28 parliaments of the European Union having a vote on CETA. So it will therefore go to the Council of Ministers, where a qualified majority will apply, and we will be bound into that treaty because of that. Contained in that treaty, as in TTIP and in similar treaties, is a thing called investor-state dispute resolution. Private legal courts which allow multinationals to sue governments if they're losing profits out of environmental changes. So Wallström in Sweden is currently suing the German government for 6 billion euros because it's moving away from nuclear energy towards wind farms. Philip Morris is suing Uruguay, Australia and Ireland and Norway and other countries for plain packaging being put on cigarettes. Veolia, the French waste disposal firm, which runs street cleaning in Birmingham, Leeds and probably some other places around it, this is the very final point, is currently suing Egypt because it's raised the minimum wage. And that's the heart of these trade deals, giving much more power to multinationals, and we're not going to get a vote on them.
Thank you, Dave. Les, does that help?
Yeah, it's a big subject.
It is, it's huge.
Difficult.
It is.
Yeah.
Just thing I want to say, I've actually canvassed Jeremy on TTIP from a Labour perspective, and invoking the power of this Parliament and invoking the power of MEPs and hopefully the German government and other governments against that kind of imposition. So we're not opposing opposition to TTIP and everything like that. I think we are united, hopefully.
Yeah, I'm going to ask Jeremy, and then we'll move on to another question. I want to come in with the next questioner. Thank you.
Dave has mentioned the investor-state mechanism, and it is a concern. But I would like to point out that in the United Kingdom, we have never had this. We have never lost a case. We've never with the investor. Where we've been taken to court by a major company. And I think it's incredibly important that when these trade deals are looked at, that we make sure that it is very, very clear that we will continue to be in that position. I mean, Dave talks about the cases that are being taken up at the moment. I think we need to watch them very carefully because they haven't been resolved. I mean, if they are resolved and we find that Veolia wins, Philip Morris wins on plain packaging, they will probably come then for us because we've invoked plain packaging. And that will be a very, very serious instance, a very serious outcome. However, from my knowledge, and Dave probably has more knowledge than I do on this, we have not had a case where the United Kingdom has lost such a case. Sorry.
Yeah, I think I'm going to draw that particular question to a close because we spent 15 minutes on that one, and I can see 2 questions coming up over there. I'm going to go to the female first. Thanks, Janae.
Michelle Ashton.
Thanks, Michelle.
I work at Staffordshire County Council, member of UNISON.
Yeah.
I want to pick up on the prickly issue of immigration.
Yeah.
Now, we all remember David Cameron famously saying at the beginning of the 2010 general election that I want to bring immigration down to below 100,000. And in the light of the news today that Steve Hilton, one of his former advisors, told him back in 2012 that was impossible, I'd like the panel, and especially Jeremy, to give me a number that would represent a reasonable level of immigration. And I also want that against the backdrop of the fact that it's been running at the level of 330,000 per annum. I assume that includes families and couples, but we only build something like about 120,000 houses each year, and that is to just, and we need something like 250,000 houses every year to just cover the existing domestic population. So I'd like a figure, please, as to what would be a reasonable level of immigration.
Thank you. Great question, Michelle. And I'm going to tack on to that for panellists, both what is a reasonable level of immigration, but what also is, in your view, a reasonable level of migration from the UK overseas to the EU or elsewhere. Do you fear that we lose some of our most talented individuals, and if so, why? I'm going to put this question firstly over to this side. Graham, Dave, either of you want to go first on this? Fire away, Graham.
Well, I'm old enough, unfortunately, to remember the immigration debates of the 60s and 70s in my defence. I was very young. And, you know, then it was really very strange because people were very focused. It's kind of a bit counterintuitive. When you see hundreds of thousands of people coming in, you think it's a bit problematic. But the debate was very much focused on people coming in and not people going out.